Welcome to the podcast for the Women in Sport and Exercise Academic Network. Our guests for this podcast, recorded in January 2026, are Doctors Tegan Hartmann from Charles Sturt University and Danielle Girard, who is at the University of South Australia. So first of all, they give an insight into where they work, setting the scene so you can visualise what part of Australia they work in. And then they explain from their various backgrounds how they got into research on women, specifically on pregnancy loss and endometriosis and exercise. I think they give a fascinating insight to both the clinical and applied aspects of research in this area. They also talk about their new volunteer role for WiSEAN, which is to help extend and adapt WiSEAN's activities for members in Australasia. I love their passion for mentoring, which just started with them mentoring each other and now has grown exponentially, and also their positivity for research in academia. Tegan and Dani, thanks for coming on the podcast. And how I wanted to introduce you to everybody was for you to say a little bit about where you're speaking from, because you're in Australia. Australia is a massive place. So it might even be different for people who are living in Australia to get an understanding or a feel for where you are. So can you say where you're living and working and what your environment is right now so we can picture that in our minds?
Wonderful. I'll make a start. So my name's Tegan Hartmann. I'm a teaching and research academic at Charles Sturt University. So Charles Sturt University, or the Charles Sturt University campus that I'm at, is in Bathurst, New South Wales in Australia. So Bathurst is a regional city. It's about 3 hours away from Sydney. So we're inland. It's the largest regional university in Australia, but we also do a lot of online stuff. So we've got our main campuses. Bathurst is one of them, but we're everywhere at this stage.
And I'm Danielle Girard. I'm actually based in South Australia in capital city called Adelaide. It's a beautiful scenery here. We're called the 20-minute city. We're 20 minutes from the beach, 20 minutes from the hills, 20 minutes from like everywhere, which is fantastic. The university I'm at has only recently been founded. It's actually a merger of two statewide universities that we've got here. So it's Adelaide University, and literally kicked off about a week ago on the 5th of January. So lots of work getting the merger between them done. Where I'm situated is right in the middle of the city, which is great, accessible to absolutely everything. But we do have campuses right across Adelaide, both in the metropolitan, but also the regional areas as well, which is great.
Well, sorry, Tegan, but Dani sold hers a little bit more with the 20-minute day. 20-minute beach. I was hooked on that. I thought, right, okay, that's a good place to go then.
Look, fair enough.
Can I just say, Tegan, and sorry, Tegan, this isn't to put salt in wounds, but before I got my job here, Tegan's goal was to come to Adelaide. So I'm sorry, I stole her dream location. So Tegan's onto it anyway.
Thanks for that, both of you. So in terms of your research, and I looked at what you've done in the past, and between the two of you, you've done so much stuff. So you've done things on immune function, on inflammatory response, on smoking, mental health, Parkinson's disease, cardiovascular disease. I see obviously you've also done research related to women, so endometriosis, PCOS, pregnancy loss. How did you arrive at that research from the stuff that you were doing before that? What got you hooked onto doing the research that you're doing on women?
So I guess it's a bit of a curly tale. I did a bachelor degree in exercise science. I then went on to do an honours degree and PhD, examining the immune and inflammatory effects of smoking and exercise in smokers. Dani and I actually completed our PhDs at the same time. We shared cubicles, we were running buddies, we've known each other for a long time. Then I carried that immune and inflammatory aspect forward to mental health disorders, so looking at mental health disorders. And during that time, I was running a training study. So this is around 2019. I was actually trying to conceive myself. And this was not the process I thought it was going to be. So I experienced infertility and pregnancy loss. And that process was then obviously interwoven with mental health disorders. And one of the ways that I started to try to help myself manage my grief and move forward was look at the literature in that space. And this is what really propelled me into that area of women's health. I had Dani and I meet regularly, and we were having conversations about pregnancy loss and exercise, and why there's not enough literature in this space. And obviously, we're not the first people to experience pregnancy loss, but there weren't those conversations around exercise to prevent or treat mental health disorders in women who have experienced loss. So that sort of started the ball rolling in women's health. We wrote a brief review for Exercise and Sports Science Reviews. We then we wrote a blog for one of the not-for-profits within Australia, Pink Elephant Support Network, which then focuses on helping women through their grief after pregnancy loss. And then a number of other pieces that got a lot of traction in that space. So that's sort of my journey forward into women's health in particular, or our space at the moment.
Yeah, and I guess for me, as probably my real starting point was when I left school, I trained to be a personal trainer, and the majority of the clientele that I was working with was between about 35 to about 70 years of age. And I really just found that almost everyone had either an underlying musculoskeletal problem, like maybe lower back pain or knee pain or osteoporosis, some people going through cancer treatment, some people with like chronic fatigue. And I really felt under prepared or adequately trained to really support them as much as I could. So I went back to study, did an undergraduate like Tegan did. And towards the end of my studies, one of the academics approached me and just said, oh, look, are you interested in doing some research? I've got this project. It's looking at resistance training in menopausal women and bone mineral density changes. And I was like, oh my gosh, like absolutely. That sounds exactly the type of population I want to be researching in. Ended up not being that project, but it hooked me into the idea of doing some research. I actually ended up looking at some of the musculoskeletal changes that happen with men that have been treated for prostate cancer with androgen deprivation therapy. I really got interested in the research side of things, thought I might continue on. My PhD ended up being in women with breast cancer and some of the fatigue that they experience. And like Tegan, I have experienced recurrent pregnancy loss. Same time as Tegan, this is probably really something that we further bonded over, even though we had our running and our doing our PhDs together. And, I know the same for Tegan, the mental health struggles that were associated with that were just like bigger than I ever thought would be experienced. And, exercise was really my kind of go-to therapy. And yeah, just knew that wanted to raise that awareness, build that case for why exercise should actually be part of the care that women, or an option anyway, for women to undertake for those mental health benefits, but also really interested in those physical changes that happen along with it as well. And I guess some of that other work is in the endo space. So me and Tegan, again, I don't know why this happens to us at the same sort of time, but we're both trying to develop some lectures for our students on endometriosis and exercise. And there just really isn't anything there to base your lecture on, which is, really, really challenging. So we're like, all right, that's it. If there's nothing there, we'll create our own research. And we're very fortunate enough to get a little small pocket of funding, which helped to kickstart us. We actually got a few studies that we're still working on to get published at the moment, but have had a recent paper out of that come about. And Tegan's been very fortunate enough to secure a little more research funding for us. So we've got some good projects that are going to be coming up in the future, really working in that endo space and women in those rural and remote areas. And some of the work that we found really highlighted that the duration of exercise that someone engages in, more so than anything to do with like intensity or the type of activity that they do, can really help with reducing those endo symptoms, improving pain. Tegan helped me out here. I'm forgetting all the other really good stuff. Oh, and biomarkers. I'll let Tegan speak maybe about the biomarkers. Yeah.
Yeah. So as Dani said, we found that it was the duration of exercise, regardless of intensity, that produce favourable outcomes or was inversely associated with the likes of C-reactive protein and estradiol, which are associated with symptom severity. So a very cool finding for that study and something that we will hopefully build on.
And I guess maybe something to mention here too, like one of the reasons me and Tegan worked so well together, Tegan's very, very interested in all those biomarkers. I mean, I am to a degree as well, but I feel like how I've kind of landed in the research always seems to stem more from that applied clinical type view, which works really, really well. Like Tegan's got the interest in, we want to know this, and I'm really going, well, we need an outcome that's really going to help with that translation into practice for clinicians as well. So it seems to work pretty well.
I mean, going back a bit, I was really interested in how you arrived there. That was interesting from a personal point of view. With pregnancy loss for me, I think I at one point thought, well, right, I'm going to do some research on this then. And like you say, yes, there is information out there in terms of research for identified issues like endometriosis, like infertility, pregnancy loss, but not that relationship with exercise. And I think at the time I couldn't see a link. You're talking about biomarkers with this. What are you actually talking about specifically with that?
So with the pregnancy loss research, what we are currently focusing on is the mental health outcomes. So at this stage, we're looking at how can exercise be used as a tool to prevent adverse mental health outcomes. In the endometriosis space, that's where we're starting to look at the likes of C-reactive protein, which is an inflammatory biomarker, estradiol, and we have looked at cortisol, but that hasn't given us a lot at this stage, just as a few baseline markers. So what we know about endometriosis is that the higher levels of estrogen are generally associated with worse symptoms. Likewise, if there's higher inflammatory markers, that then generally causes, for example, more pain or worse symptoms. So if we pull together what we know about exercise and inflammation at the moment, is that generally for most people, regular exercise can be effective at regulating or down-regulating some of those inflammatory biomarkers. So what we want to do in this space is look at, we know this about exercise. We also know this about endometriosis. Can we see if exercise can be used as a tool to decrease inflammation? Now, one of the interesting findings from the study that we've just had published is that the fat distribution. So there are very few papers at the moment that are published in endometriosis and inflammation that look at fat distribution as measured by DEXA. Most of them are self-reported BMI. As far as we're aware, our study was one of the first to look at DEXA to then determine where fat is distributed. And what we found is that in the subset of women that we sampled, where fat was more centrally distributed, higher pain resulted. And we know that adipose sites can release inflammatory cytokines. So it's a source of inflammation. So, that's something that we'd like to explore further down the track as well.
And I think linking it back in with the pregnancy loss as well, with the mental health aspects, that chronic stress, like we do see high rates of PTSD that are, beyond just even that short acute period of time, like up to 10 years, I think some of the data, and look, the data's not even that extensive, but those stress, mental health related aspects can really go on for big periods of time. So you think about how chronic stress might affect your body in that long term, and back to the inflammatory system and how that does impact on different biomarkers is really how we want to explore that as well. And in our pregnancy loss paper, certainly there's that link between like being more overweight and having higher rates of recurrent pregnancy loss, and the value of just even engaging in like 10 minutes of exercise can really help with fecundability and that type of thing.
What about PCOS? Is there a link there as well?
So we haven't done any biomarker work in PCOS at the moment, so probably can't comment too much on the PCOS, but absolutely it is an inflammatory based condition, or at least some types definitely are. I know they've definitely broaden out their different phenotypes of classification for PCOS recently, but definitely inflammatory markers are usually very high in your PCOS population. And we know that the evidence for exercise is highly supportive of helping to regulate those inflammatory responses and bring back a better state of hormonal status for people.
And this research, have you got more of it coming out?
Yep.
What's on the horizon?
Dani?
Yep. So off one of the smaller pockets of money that we had in the endo space, we're currently writing up a paper that looked at a survey of around about 102 women with endo right across Australia. And we looked at what their physical activity habits were. We looked at what their endo symptoms were. We looked at depressive symptoms and a whole range of other just demographic type factors. And some of the really interesting stuff out of that is that, the intensity of exercise should really be in that moderate kind of category in terms of having the best responses for symptoms, which, look, a bugbear of Tegan and I in this space is what the guidelines currently state doesn't really say, yes, exercise. It's on the fence. It's like we've got some studies that definitely support exercise, but because there is that heightened potential for exacerbation of symptoms, most clinicians want to steer clear of it, which from our point of view, having surveyed these women and the women that we work with, they're exercising. And the ones that are exercising are actually finding that their symptoms are in a better place than those that don't exercise. So we really want to be able to, provide that support for the guidelines to maybe be a little more forthcoming that exercise can have a role. But really, it also hinges on clinicians knowing what type of exercises to prescribe, because if you don't really have a good understanding about the types of exercise to prescribe, they probably are prescribing the wrong exercise. So there probably is the potential to have caution in the wind with what gets prescribed. So it's a bit of a chicken and an egg situation that without that evidence, we can't really move it forward, but we absolutely know that there's good value in exercise for these women. So hopefully that paper should be out, I don't know, within the year. It takes forever for publications to eventuate. And then we've got a whole bunch of just open-ended questions that we surveyed these women about too. So I don't know, Tegan, if you want to speak to any of that, but we'll do some qual exploration around what they're actually saying about their exercise, the types of exercise and barriers and enablers.
Yeah. So we're really capturing the perceptions of the women living with endometriosis, how their hormones fluctuate, how their symptoms fluctuate, and what they do with their exercise and their perceptions of exercise. So that's part 3. And then moving forward, as Dani mentioned earlier, we've got some funding now to expand the findings from that study we've just had published. So what we're looking at in this study is regional, rural and remote women, because these women don't have the same access to healthcare that women in those metropolitan areas do. But the findings are obviously transferable to all women living with endo. But we're trying to explore a critical threshold for exercise duration. So how much exercise produces those favourable outcomes for reductions in symptom severity and improvements in biomarkers. So we're still waiting on final approvals for that. Hopefully we'll start recruitment in March to then roll out the 12-week walking and yoga intervention. So as I mentioned, it will be remotely monitored. So we're sending women Garmins, we're sending them dried blood spot kits, and then prescribing them exercise. So that will roll out in 2026 with hopefully that work to be published the year after.
Did you say yoga intervention?
Yes, yeah. So a bit of a side background for me is I also run a yoga business and I'm a yoga instructor. So obviously look quite favorably on yoga, but we also know that there's a little bit of literature published in the endometriosis space for improvement in pain symptoms and improvement in quality of life. So what we've done is taken all of that literature that reports yoga, we've collated it, and we've designed a number of yoga classes that will be pre-recorded and delivered to the women. Those classes have also been reviewed by 3 of our clinical exercise physiologists. So that's going to form part of that intervention, which is something that when we're looking at, self-management, and this is something that Dani really emphasizes, is that if we can give women a tool for self-management, whether that be walking in yoga, then that's something that can potentially improve their quality of life.
I've probably said this before, but this kind of research came to my attention in one of our conferences where somebody was talking about IVF treatment and what exercise could be prescribed during the time that they were going for this treatment, and how little information there was. And I think she was doing a PhD in that area. So yeah, this research is vitally important. What do you think is more important, to do the biomarker stuff, the clinical research stuff, or is it more important, do you think, to do the applied work so you could get messages out to the practitioners?
See, we debate this all the time. Part of my role at the university I work at has been for the last 7 years as what they call a program director. So I'm really charged with making sure that the curriculum meets industry demands, it meets the industry's standards of care. So I guess from my perspective, I work a lot with industry and clinicians, and they want to be as prepared as they can. And industry wants as prepared as we can have graduates. So from my perspective, I know the pushback is there's a gap in research, and it's really difficult for us to, as clinicians, build a case for why clients should be sent to us for exercise care, even though we know anecdotally there's great benefits across such a broad spectrum of health indicators. So we need that, but that is really underlined by good quality research, and you really need those biomarkers and those bits of change to really make funders who will fund bigger projects, so that there's larger evidence base and higher quality studies to engage. So me and Tegan have had a bit of a battle along the way trying to get some good funding for projects that we have put forward. In the endo space in particular, feedback is, look, this is all great, but, we are still just hesitant on the exacerbation of symptoms. So, we're hesitant to put money in, which it's a bit of a tricky one, I think, but yeah.
I also think the lived experience of women living with endometriosis and pregnancy loss is of critical importance here, because a part of what we did when designing this study that we're rolling out this year is we had a co-design meeting, and we asked women about what they're doing, if they could engage in a little bit more exercise, or would they be open to this sort of exercise. And, as we've spoken about, the symptom severity, the classification of the stage of endometriosis, it's all going to contribute to whether they can or cannot participate in exercise. So I think capturing the lived experience and their perceptions is, it's just as important as the biomarkers. It's just as important as the applied element, because essentially these are the women we're trying to help. So I think if we involve them in the process as much as possible, from idea conception or design of the study to then dissemination of the study, then we're going to shift the field forward in a really meaningful way.
I think too, Tegan talked about the lived experience, but also in the co-design phase, we also included clinicians. And I think you'd reported back, Tegan, some quite interesting things, that what the clinicians said they were doing and what the people with endo were saying they were doing, there was still a bit of disparity between what the clinicians thought that the clients needed. And you'd think they would be very client-centered in what their approach is. So, yeah, I think it's multifaceted. I think everything needs to inch forward itself. Like if the research is going forward from a mechanistic point of view and a biomarker point of view, but not being realistic to what individuals need or what the clinicians need, like it could be useless information, but it'll also drive funding and drive, the evidence base for honing in on what the specifics of the prescription of exercise should be. So I'm not going to name one of them. I think all of it's really important.
This sounds really exciting, and I really look forward to reading about it. Please let us all know when these things get published. Now, alongside your research, you've also taken on this volunteer role of spreading WiSEAN activities out through Australasia, and specifically looking at mentoring as part of that. What got you into looking at the Women in Sport and Exercise Academic Network at the start? How did you come across it?
Yeah. Well, fortunately, Tegan came across you guys, which was just wonderful. So, I mean, I don't know how many years now, Tegan, you and I have been trying to peer mentor each other. But I mean, I was based in Bathurst, Tegan, for our PhDs, having moved from one university to somewhere else. I mean, under the assumption that going to a city, I'm going to have great networks and, collaborations and whatever else. But really that wasn't the case. And I feel like, just heading into trying to establish ourselves as researchers, I think we were both, and Tegan being based in a rural setting where it is more difficult to maybe find people with similar interests. I think we were both at a bit of a point where we're like, oh my gosh, how do we form these networks? We feel like we need that support, that encouragement, that motivation. But we were finding it really, really, really difficult. And I mean, we kind of ended up just settling on the fact that, well, maybe we help each other out, which we have done, which is great. But I think off that, we really see the value. Like, you have to network. It's the only way that you can build good collaborations, spread the word. So I think that's what we want to do. Like, we've got research students that we look after and can see that they could easily fall in that trap again of not having mechanisms or ways of being able to connect with other people. I've also had some, quite often universities will offer mentoring programs, but sometimes the incentive for why you get mentored, I think, doesn't always lend to an authentic, nice experience. So I think for Tegan and I, we just want people to connect, to feel that it is really challenging sometimes to feel that your research has worth when you put a lot of work into it, and sometimes they won't get published. Or how do we find other people who are working in this space? Particularly, I mean, you've mentioned Australia's huge, right? There are 35 different universities here that are quite widely spread out that offer exercise science type degrees. So, it can be really challenging for us to know what other people are doing. And, we're really keen to be able to try and pull as many people together and build awareness. Yeah, Tegan, I don't know if there's more that you want to comment on that.
No, I think you've covered it. I think there's a tremendous capability when women band together and help each other and lift each other up in the workspace. And the sport and exercise science realm is so unique in its research activity, research dissemination, and particularly when you look at women's health research as well. So I found the WiSEAN group just through trying to expand my network, and I signed up, and I've been getting great updates and signed up for the mentoring just before my maternity leave. And yeah, that's how it all sort of started, the ball rolling, and I think there's great things to come in this space.
And you've had a great response regarding the mentoring scheme.
Yes, and we've been checking in with some of the people who are in the mentoring scheme, and they are having really, really positive experiences. So one of the things we'd like to do in this coming year is really build it. So expand the awareness within Australia and New Zealand in particular. So, advocate for joining the network, but then joining that mentoring program, because there are a number of incredible women in Australia and New Zealand who are doing amazing things in research, in teaching. And we also have a really large number of early career researchers that will benefit from connection. So that's one of the goals, is to really expand the Australian and New Zealand membership base, but then draw more people into the mentoring program to collaborate, to network, and to lift each other up.
I think one of the motivators for Tegan and I is love what you guys are doing, but because we are on the other side of the world, like those time differences, sometimes like we see events and opportunities and we're like, oh, we can't really do that. So if we can kind of create something a little closer to home that's still connected in that wider networking, mentoring arrangement, I think, yeah, it's only going to help provide those opportunities, that if there are women like me and Tegan that are just feeling like we're, can we continue? Is this, should we be tapping out of doing a job like this now, or should we persist? And, I think with the supportiveness that Tegan and I have had with each other, like, I don't know, it just takes forever to get stuff going. But I'm all of a sudden looking back going, I haven't had that thought in forever of thinking like, can I do this any longer? Like, I'm going nowhere. I feel like I'm just, keep pushing everything up this hill that keeps rolling back down again. So yeah, like if this can be a platform for other people to, you know, feel a bit more normal, feel a bit more supported, and in whatever capacity of mentoring and supportiveness and connectedness that they need, we want to be there because, well, you know, we've seen great value of it.
Well, you can tell that because you've said you've supported each other and you see the benefit yourselves, both as a mentor and a mentee. So it obviously just makes sense.
Yeah.
And in Australia at the moment, in terms of research on women in exercise and sport, is there anything that's particularly taken off right now, particularly strong in terms of there's a lot of people researching in this space? And do you think that's different compared to other countries? What do you see?
Well, I think there's a lot of research happening in exercise and pregnancy, which I think is very similar to other countries. More emerging research in those conditions that we spoke about, the PCOS, the endometriosis, fertility and pregnancy loss. I think they're sort of lower level, ready to start their trajectory upward. But in my opinion, I think it's pregnancy and postpartum that we're seeing a lot of research, particularly in the women's health.
Yeah, I reckon from my view of that broader research context, I would say it's fairly similar to what's going on everywhere else. So performance, menstrual cycle, the role of, you know, oral contraceptives in physical performance, I think is a kind of hot topic. Yeah, definitely the pregnancy, whether it's during pregnancy, the postpartum periods, some work in that mental health space. And I'm not talking in the loss space, I'm just talking in the general postpartum periods, pelvic floor and how important that is for people in terms of returning to play or life. So another bit of work this is more from a clinician point of view that I was involved in the last year with an honours student, and we surveyed some clinical EPs in Australia, and they really highlighted that the evidence base for PCOS, endo, pregnancy, is just lacking, and particularly in terms of what to assess and what to prescribe. There's more of the contextual information. There's lots, and I shouldn't say lots because there's not, but more information in that athletic sporting type population, whereas that's not going to apply to your everyday person that may never have exercised before, or, you know, it is just some basic walking type activities, like how and when should they actually be engaging in exercise. And look, me and Tegan would absolutely love to see that pregnancy continuum expand out and have infertility, pregnancy loss, recurrent loss, the mental health aspects of that really incorporated, and not really just focused on that key period of time, because similar physiological changes, very significant mental health outcomes could be associated with it. So yeah, I think similar across the board with elderly research. And just gender differences, I think, too. I should say that as well, that, you know, really recognising that we can't really rely on the data that's there from a performance perspective, because there are obviously key differences between men and women, particularly with all these changes in hormones. And I guess the other one that me and Tegan haven't talked about yet, but it's on our to-do list, we've probably got 100 different studies that we kind of want to sink our teeth into, but that perimenopausal kind of periods and some of the changes that are going on there, particularly in terms of the mental health, we're very keen to keep exploring the mental health. Tegan's quite keen to also explore, and Tegan, maybe you're better at explaining this, but, you know, some of those changes that are going on in terms of blood flow in the brain and linking that back into some inflammation, I think.
Yes, hyperfrontality and menopause and mental health disorders. Yeah, that's on the list.
On the list to do.
So you might have somebody listening right now who's thinking, oh, I really like this research, I'd like to get involved. And more specifically, they might be thinking, I'd quite like to come to Australia. Yes. I'm thinking that really. Actually, it's probably just me. I don't know, but I don't know the number of times I've looked up various countries and thought, what are the requirements to get a visa? You know, or to live there long term. It's really difficult. But what is the layout of the land in terms of academia in Australia that might be unique to Australia? Is there a way in? Is there a pathway, a predefined pathway that is almost easier to do to reach a point or to get a job?
There's not generally a predefined pathway, I'd say. People go through a bachelor's degree, an honours or a master's by research, and then a PhD. So that's the general pathway into academia. But there's also a number of people who are clinicians in practice that then come into academia as well. So from another country, I'd say if there was a PhD or significant clinical experience, that would warrant, grounds, depending upon the job, of course, a pathway into academia. What do you think, Dani?
Definitely is the opportunity. However, we do kind of find that the clinician-based academic do find it really tricky in terms of career progression. So really most universities, their preference is that you do have a PhD, that you are research active, and that you do supervise students. At the university that I'm at, they're actually trying to build a case, particularly within the health sciences, for a clinician in practice type role where, because obviously for the degrees, we've got physiotherapists, the exercise physiologists, the exercise scientists, podiatry, speech therapy, like all of those allied health professions. Those clinicians are so valuable to our development of curriculum. And we need a lot of supervision of students when they're trying to build up their clinical hours to be able to practice. So they are working hard, at least at my uni. I don't know whether it's the same at Charles Sturt with you, Tegan, but I think they're calling it clinician in residence or something like that. So that some teaching, some working in the clinics that are community-based within the university setting, sometimes maybe going out to work at other facilities, but, having roles like that within the university sector. But I don't know what the progression beyond, longer term, what that might look like for those individuals, whether there's much progress beyond just that type of role. I don't know.
The standard at Charles Sturt academic role is teaching research. So almost half of my role is teaching, and then the other half is research. And it's different if there's a research institute, but for a teaching and research academic, it's sort of a split between the two. So to then, as Dani said, remain research active, they generally need to have a PhD or something equivalent.
I think in the UK, there seems to be a split path in terms of the career you might take. So you might be doing a PhD and a postdoc and stay in that research field and maybe drop into teaching a little bit, but not very much. Whereas there's a definite teaching route. And maybe this is because of the way the universities have developed from polytechnics, for instance, that polytechnics traditionally more applied technical type courses. So there would be a teaching route, but you might also do a PhD and then get into research that way. Is that a similar scenario, or is it more embedded?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we certainly have lots of postdoc positions. So sometimes people will just go and be a researcher, and very little teaching coming along with that. But I would say at our uni, it's mostly teaching only. A good handful of what we call balanced, as Tegan and myself are. So we've got about half teaching, half research. So there's probably 3 pathways, but it is, I watch the people who are just research only, and they're grant to grant, they don't have a tenure at a particular an ongoing continuing position, which can be quite challenging. I think for Tegan and myself, we're really lucky. I mean, I love teaching and I also love research, but I certainly know plenty of the research only that they don't really want to be teaching. As little teaching as they can do, they're happy with if they can get funding to buy out their teaching. So much harder. I think Tegan and I are pretty lucky with the type of role that we've got.
Yeah.
This might be just my experience, but if you do have a teaching role, sometimes it's very difficult to do the research because you would have to get research funding, first of all, because there's no funding otherwise. So you have to apply for funding, but you'll carry on having a massive teaching load and then somehow have to also apply for a grant initially to get some money to release you from your teaching. So it's almost chicken and egg scenario. You can't do it because you haven't got any time, but you want more time to do the research.
I've just said me and Tegan are in a really good position, but you just reminded me that absolutely this is
But you're not.
factual, Jackie. This is absolutely factual that, yes, teaching can take up a lot of time, and it is much harder for us to get research funding because we haven't got the time to build that track record. Like, it's taken us forever, which I think is, coming back to this mentoring is why we were probably feeling so frustrated. It's like, I've got to teach and I've got to teach well, but I also need to get, on some bigger grants. And we haven't had big grants. We're putting in plenty of applications in the last couple of years to try and, nothing's getting up in terms of the big funding. But I feel like we've been very fortunate that even with small pockets of money, we actually we're able to get a lot done. I'm always kind of amazed when I see these big grants getting up. Tegan and I have been on a couple, and the actual, yes, bigger size studies, but what they're trying to do is still the same sort of stuff that we can still build, more of those pilot-based studies that still have good impact from a clinical and a research perspective. So yes, I feel the pain on that one, Jackie. That is absolutely what we are, but I feel like we're figuring out ways in which we can still be quite impactful and research active, but it has taken us longer to get here.
Yeah, I'd say it's taken me 10 years. I've been in my role here at CHESMS for 10 years, and I was caught in that trap very early in my career, is that I really wanted to be a good teacher, and you throw everything into that. And then your research just sort of starts to dwindle. And then all of a sudden you've moved out of that early career researcher phase where there's a bit more funding available, and then you're a mid-career researcher. So one of the ways that I found to move forward in that space was obviously to reach out to people and talk about the balance and how you can, for example, block out one day or certain elements of time to make sure your research gets done, because generally it's the first thing to drop off when teaching gets busy. But then also be very efficient with the teaching practices. The way in which we taught 10 years ago is not the way we teach now. And there's a lot of technology and different, lecture lengths that once you nail it, it becomes a lot easier. But in that early career space, it's very challenging.
Definitely.
Yeah, I think that those are really good tips, especially putting time aside to do your research. And do you know what? I just love your positivity as well. That you're saying, and it's right, you might be doing a small bit of research, but then that might impact somebody who's doing a much larger piece of research that makes a hit globally that you've actually contributed to because you started it. Let's be positive about those little bits of research, the dirty research, as some people call it. I don't know why.
We'll take it.
that you're doing, because that can contribute to much bigger things. And the applied approach as well, which often can be sometimes neglected if you are more of a biology, sort of pure science type person. Thanks ever so much for coming on the podcast today. I've learned so much, and I love your enthusiasm and the support that you've been giving to each other to make you who you are now. And I'm sure this will expand to other people as well. It's so lovely to chat to you.
Thanks so much, Jackie, for having us.
It's been great.